Okay, welcome to WHAP Chapter 15 breakdown right here. Basically, we're going to talk about China in this section. There's three main dynasties that we talk about in this section. They're the Sui dynasty, which starts everything off, which followed by the Tang dynasty, and then the Tang dynasty would be followed by the Song dynasty. Really, up to this point, there's never really been a more prosperous time period in Chinese history. The Sui dynasty is a dynasty that links the that it repairs some damages that had happened in the Great Wall of China. It also finished building something called the Grand Canal, which was basically this canal network that kind of linked the south with the north, which really helped facilitate internal trade, domestic trade inside of China. And really was a grand feat of the Sui dynasty. Now, the Sui dynasty doesn't last very long. That's part of its problem. It's roughly a 100-year dynasty. It's founded by Yang Xian. It is centralized in authority, and they are venturing into Korea and some of these outskirts satellite areas. But for the most part, they really just kind of they're important because they get things rolling for the Tang dynasty, which is going to follow them. Now, the Tang dynasty, they build off of like the Grand Canal. They build off of the things that the Sui started. You know, the Sui used a centralized way of doing things. The Sui used civil service people for their bureaucracy, and the Tang would come in and do the same thing, really. But they were a 300-year dynasty, so 3 times as long. Stability and peace throughout this time period for them. One of the main things you need to know about in the Tang dynasty was the equal field system. Basically, under equal field system, the government owned all the land, and the reason they did it, you know this from other chapters, that China was always having problems with control of the land and, you know, who they tax and how much they tax. Well, under the equal field system, the idea was the government could disperse the land to everyone, and it could keep from certain people's aristocrats monopolizing all the land. It was really more on paper. It did do some good. But there was still monopolization of land in the hands of the wealthy to a certain degree because, you know, if you got the money, you still got the influence. But it was a nice gesture, and it did take care of some of the problems, at least for a little bit. In the Tang dynasty, you really see China venturing hard into Korea and Vietnam as well to try to make them into satellite states. Now, they're going to have some issues back home, the Tang will. That are going to keep them. They never really just dominate Korea or Vietnam, as we'll talk about a little bit later on in this breakdown. But the Tang Taizong's probably their best emperor. He gets a lot of things done. Civil service exam, you're working based on your merit. It's a merit-based system. Make sure you know that. But one of the emperors that comes along gets a little bit lazy. He's more worried about his retreat outside. You know, getting fed grapes and whatnot. He's not worried about administering his republic, and so rebellion grew. Basically, you had the Lushan man that came in and it caused a lot of problems. They did put him down, but to do it, they had to bring in some Uyghur nomadic peoples from Central Asia, basically a cousin to the Turk. And these nomadic peoples came in and helped put down the rebellion, but they did it at a cost. They asked to be able to loot the capital city, which the Tang Emperor allowed them to do. And basically, you invited the wolf in for dinner. Once the Uyghurs were there, they were really the de facto rulers, and the Tangs were just puppets. They were figureheads who were controlled by the Uyghurs. So they really made their own bed right there by inviting these Uyghur Turks in. Now, they will eventually fall, and the dynasty that will replace them is the Song dynasty. The Song dynasty is a little bit unique. It lasts for a long time too. It's a 300-year dynasty, but a lot of its its influence is from the south, and a lot of it's based off of the fast ripening rice that they create, and basically allowed them to harvest twice as much food as they were before. And so both in the Tang and the Song dynasty, you see such a huge population growth that really affects China. There were nomadic incursions during the Song dynasty, to such a degree that the Song the empire that they ruled would be cut in half, and the Jin, which are basically the Jin are from a people called the Jurchen, who are another group of nomads that surround China. They'll swoop in, they'll take some Song land, and they'll establish something called the Jin dynasty in the north, and the Song will retreat into the south, where basically the agriculture is and that fast ripening rice. During both the Tang and the Song dynasty, you see the advent of paper currency. You see where foot binding becomes this weird phenomenon where the young ladies, their feet are smashed up. For some reason, they think small feet are cute feet. And the young ladies' feet are smashed into these little bitty shoes. And basically it gets so bad that it deforms them that the women can't even walk, which is just how they want it. It's a patriarchal system. They don't want the women. The women are stuck in the home. And that's what they were going for anyway. But some of the innovations, of course, porcelain, which is a great trading item. Gunpowder, which, it changes the world. Gunpowder does, and it comes out of China. And it comes out of China during this time period. Some of these Chinese cities have become very cosmopolitan. They're a mix of all these different merchants who live in these merchant quarters. You see movable type coming in this time period. Instead of used to, you would carve a whole page, and then you would put ink on that, and you would print the whole page. Movable type allowed you to make the page whatever you wanted it to, so you can move it rather quickly instead of having to carve out a whole page. So movable type really changes the world as well. As far as sailing goes, they developed the magnetic compass, which helped the Chinese really dominate the Indian Ocean and out into the Pacific as well. Also during this time period, you see this is when Buddhism starts getting big. It comes out of the merchant quarters and expands into the rest of China. Monasteries, these Buddhist monasteries, try to help the poor. That's one of the things that they try to do. There's a kind of a symbiotic blending between Daoism and Buddhism. But Daoists do not like Buddhists. But Buddhists would take some of the same wording, and that made it more... It made it where the Chinese were more willing to accept Buddhism, because it was a foreign religion out of India. They were like, oh yeah, okay, I've heard some of this stuff before. Confucius, of course, did not like Buddhism because, in a way, Buddhism was trying to take Confucius out, Confucianism out. This would actually create something called Neo-Confucianism, and that Neo-Confucianism would travel out into the satellite states and everything like that. But basically Neo-Confucius just hitting back on the fact that Confucianism can solve problems, because that was the idea. We still had, Confucianism was supposed to restore social order, and it fell. So last little bit right here on the Silla dynasty, which is out of Korea. They were powerful enough that they were able to keep the Chinese at bay. These two the Chinese and the Korean dynasties were butting heads here, but neither one was really able to get the advantage. But on paper, China still had some advantages. So the Silla dynasty, they allowed themselves to go into a tributary system, meaning that they would pay some money, some taxes, basically to China, for China to keep its armies out of there. And they would accept in some of Confucius ideas and some Buddhism and stuff like that. Vietnam, there was some cultural diffusion from China to Vietnam as well, but Vietnam, it never really got as much. There was a huge cultural diffusion into Japan. The Japanese came in and really tried to model much of their society over the Chinese, so there was a lot of that. And we'll talk about Japan more a little bit later. Okay, that'll work for this chapter.